Good morning, everyone. I'm Ian from Able City in Burbank, and today we are going to be talking about the Sony optical disk archive system. Something that might not be readily something you think about production, but it's an incredibly important part of production, because what it really comes down to is preserving your assets that you've worked so hard to acquire. And where do you put that footage in a safe environment that will stand the test of time? Now, prior to this, our workflow primarily was to go to LTO cassettes. Okay, you had footage on a media card, you had it on a hard drive, and the first thing we need to acknowledge is that hard drives are not. I make an analogy of hard drives are kind of like apartments. You just kind of have them for a while and then you move on. So what's interesting about the Sony way of looking at this is the disk technology and what it affords us as sort of something different from LTO. So do you want to kind of, first of all, talk about what, well, with LTO, we have a generational thing to think about.
That is correct.
In other words, LTO versions change over time, and as we have, say, an LTO 4 series, we need to move it to an LTO 6. Do we have the same issues with the disk products?
That's a great question, Ian. What happens is that with ODA, or Optical Disk Archive, what you'll find is that even from Gen 1, currently Gen 2, and even future generations, all backwards compatible. So what would happen is that even if you started even in Gen 1 media, doesn't matter if I'm on Gen 5, 6, or 7, will always be able to read that particular generation, even from the first archive that we ever did with that particular medium.
So the investment I make in a disk today is as relevant today as it will be a year, 2 years from now.
That is correct, and with a 100-year shelf life. So we're looking at, again, no magnetic media. Optical, this is the only media out there today that is non-magnetic. So again, there's huge advantages to that. So I don't have to worry about any magnetic or losing data because of maybe being too close to something or whatever type of things.
So let's talk about, for a moment, about the architecture, the process of physically getting our assets onto these drives. Now, Sony has a wide array of different options. Let's talk about what the sort of the startup one is, up to, say, a more sophisticated. That may change with our needs. Maybe you start out as an owner-operator, you have a small production company, and then you migrate to sort of a bigger environment.
Sure. What you'll find is that it would be similar to, you'll have a desktop reader that basically I can insert the cartridge into the unit. It's powered by USB 3, so therefore can be used on Mac, PC, Linux systems. You have the bandwidth naturally with that size of data pipe using USB 3. It's simple as putting the cartridge in. It'll show up on the hard drive in its basic form. It'll show up as a hard drive in the operating system. At that point, you could open it up, no different than if you were doing it to a drive. You can take your assets or your media and just drag and drop. But then we can grow from that. In other words, we can get into full-blown asset management systems and such. So,
okay, I just want to touch on that for a second. The act of moving assets over. Now, it can be as simple as a drag and drop. If we do that drag and drop environment, does Sony have a software platform for us to do that? Because my concern would be making sure that all the data was checksummed or that our data was moved over.
Yes, we provide an entry-level piece of software that will allow you to do metadata, all those type of features, checksum, verification, and such. And then we work very, very close with many, many partners. It's basically an open source format, so therefore lots of other vendors, whether it's media asset management, or let's say an archival type system that you currently use with our LTO today, it could coexist. So this doesn't need to replace LTO, but it could actually coexist with LTO. The beautiful thing with this, LTO is basically linear, it's tape, where this is random access, making so faster seek speeds to get to your data quicker. With this latest generation, what has happened is that with Gen 2 just being announced, now this really is operating near as fast as a hard drive would. So the speeds are definitely there, and they'll be improving even more.
That was another issue. So talk to us a little bit about the read-write speeds in relation to the different models of sophistication.
In Gen 2 media, what will happen is, in the newest one that has just came out, we have a write speed of 1 gig and a read speed of 2. Even in looking even in the future roadmap, that'll actually increase even more so. Because it's random access, it'll actually act. The fact that I don't have to search that tape, again, we pick up a tremendous amount of the fact that it almost can nearly act just like no different than if you were working with spinning spindles or hard drives.
And you also mentioned something earlier when we were speaking to each other, a really interesting thing that, as this platform gets bigger, and of course, what we haven't mentioned is that Sony provides a big infrastructure for news agencies, for broadcasting entities. Do you want to just touch on that real quick?
Absolutely. This allows us to grow today from nothing more than a desktop operation. Then we can migrate it into a full robotic system to where fully automated, where I have multiple drives to be able to read and write. So let's say I have a production house that have a number of editors out there that need to access any archival information or whatever it may be. So in the process, this can be scaled basically unlimited. There isn't a limit to where it can be. We provide it as a robot system starting out with basically a 30 cartridges, and it's just as easy in that it could be a single drive, or would best have 2 for redundancy. The old maybe write to both drives, or one's reading, one's writing, and then the robot's taking care of the information that's on the XML data. It knows what cartridge it's going to pick up, so it's really truly automated. And then that can grow into 100 disk cabinets. So what happens here is that it can be scaled from just single drive or grow it as large as you'd like. And so that's one of the beauties about ODA, excuse me. ODA is the fact that, again, you could grow it basically as large as you want and not even have to worry about that migration thing that right now that's currently with LTO.
There's also something really interesting you mentioned to me, which I would never thought of, but it's very meaningful to larger companies that have a lot of assets to archive and to keep track of. And you were mentioning the electrical.
That's right. Much lower power consumption. So today there are people in the data industry, for example, that has a lot of servers. Servers take a lot of heat, or they have to have a conditioned room, those type of things, to where, and they draw a lot more power. There is nothing touching this primarily other than light. Basically, it's optical, and so therefore the power consumption is much lower. So in larger farms, server farms and such, there's actually a power savings also that would go along with it.
So if someone wants to start thinking about archiving their footage and we want to put it onto optical drive, when we start out, what is the cost of the media?
The cost of the media, the list price, you're looking at $135 for 3.3 terabytes of storage for $135.
And we can say this can sit on a shelf, not be read, mind you.
Right.
Put back into let's say a drive in the future, and how much, or how long?
100-year shelf life.
Okay, 100-year shelf life.
It is truly an archival media. It is a true archival. A lot of people go 3, 2, 1. It's basically three copies, 2 different types of media, and 1 deep archive. This would actually serve as actually 2 or 1. So this is actually a very, very interesting way of, again, a lot of people with all their assets that they've been currently using. Everybody that's here today needs to know, where am I going to put all this information? Eventually, am I going to keep it on those disks, or am I going to use LTO? Or again, if you haven't heard about ODA, this is something that would be, again, there's some great information, and it would be something we look at. The other interesting thing is that's truly, assets are everything for production. And what you'll find is that, unlike a tape, what would happen is that the environment generally has to be a relatively clean environment. In other words, you'll have it in a controlled room, possibly. And boy, if the sprinklers ever went off, Or if you ever, if by chance, unfortunately, if you ever had a fire or a disaster, what would happen? That would not be good for a tape media-based system. We show tests to where we can take this, we have this online, to where we can take this media. It's been dropped in salt water for 2.5 weeks. And actually, they pulled it out after they actually put some staples in there to make sure to see as it pulled out, it was all oxidized and everything like that. Pull the media out. What they did is they took the cartridge apart, wiped the disc clean, put it back into the drive, read it perfectly.
All right. So I think it's pretty compelling, a great solution for archiving. Thanks so much for being here today and discussing this. It's a really important issue that needs to be addressed, especially as you start to acquire more and more media. So thanks for watching. We'll be back with more later on.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you.